most original and creative talent in our business. Would you welcome Mr. Orson Welles?
Ladies and gentlemen, Orson Welles again, come to call for another visit.
Good evening. This is Orson Welles.
Stay tuned.
Right after this episode,
for our discussion.
The American Broadcasting Company and its affiliated stations present Orson Welles in his own personal individual analysis of the news, sharpened into brilliant word pictures by his extensive traveling, plus his keen perception.
Do you hear something? Something ticking? Listen, a ticking sound. Hear it? Listen very carefully. If your kids are reading the comics, get them to listen with you for a while. Could be the ticking of a time bomb. One of the 1946 models with a wonderful new atomic feature. Notice, please, the streamlined wilderness. Yes, I said wilderness. That was once a city full of people. You ladies will be especially interested in the little children who are still slowly dying. That goes with it. A time bomb, yes, it might be. You do hear it now, don't you? The bomb, I'm holding it in my hands. You're in this radio studio. The same bomb you hold in your hands as you listen in or tune me off. The bomb you take with you to church or to the golf course. Same thing that ticks away the time as you make plans for the afternoon. Could be a time bomb. Could be the noise the world makes as it winds itself up and gets ready to explode. Oh, that's Orson Welles, you see, on the radio. He's doing another one of those broadcasts about the end of the world, trying to scare the people. Yes, this is Orson Welles. Yes, this is just a broadcast. You can laugh it off as a joke, but you can't laugh off that bomb. Neither can I. It's here to stay. The question is, are we here to stay? Can we live in the same universe with the infernal thing? That bomb, if it only stopped ticking, I could talk to you about pleasanter things, tell you about the new show that opened on Broadway, talk about a book or a concert or a prize fight or a party. You know, human interest. But just now I think what interests humans, most humans, is one awful question. When's that thing going to go off? Is there any human way of keeping this planet from skidding off into nowhere and never was? What's the price of peace? The great pacifist, who was a great war president, Woodrow Wilson, said the right is more precious than peace. Well, who's in the right, the left, or is the right right? It's all so mixed up, let's forget about it. I'll play you a hand of gin rummy. Except you can't think about the cards. The bomb gets in your way. What price will you pay for peace? You, Russia. What price will you pay? What I must pay, says Russia, no more. I'll pay what I have to pay. I will appease the English further. In Greece and Indonesia. For peace, I will even consent to live in the same world with the British Empire, says Russia. Very nice of you, says Britain. Really, Russia, you do have your gall. It's as though we said we consented to live in the same world with you. You did say so, says literal-minded Russia. You said it in San Francisco, California. And then you took it back in Fulton, Missouri. We will live with you, says liberal-minded Britain. The orator who said we can't spoke from the political dustbin. I beg your pardon, says Missouri, political dustbin. Oh, no, not you, Missouri, says liberal-minded Britain. No, Missouri. Mr. Churchill has his own portable political dustbin. He carries it around with him wherever he goes and scatters his own private dust in the wind. His Tory friends call that clearing the air. We gave him the merry old heave-ho, remember. We tossed him out in his Tory urn by a spanking good majority. Mr. Churchill doesn't speak for us. If he can't get votes, he'll settle for headlines, says Britain. Now let's get back to the main argument. Why don't you, Russia, get out of Iran? Says Russia, why don't you, Britain, get out of Greece? Says America, why don't you, Russia, get out of China? Says Russia, why don't you, America, get out of China? Says America, that's my question. I asked it first. Says Russia, why not answer it first? Says America, get out of China after you, Ivan. And says Russia with some irony, no, America first. America first? F. Ferguson filibuster takes the floor. America first, cries the senator. Who said that? That was the USSR. USSR? Another one of them blame government agencies? No, Senator, the Soviet Union. Union, says the senior senator from South somewhere. Union? Them's fighting words, son. And here the senator continues his commentary on white supremacy, the senator's voice harmonizing nicely with an ex-prime minister's, whose thoughts on the God-given superiority of those who speak English mingle in turn with the defense plea of an ex-field marshal of another master race. Why are the Nazis grinning so broadly in their little box? Hitler's hope is coming true, that's why. His enemies are divided. What does it matter who split the atom if the Allies are split? The German bulwark against Bolshevism may be reared again. Oh, yes. There's good news in Nuremberg tonight. America is speaking loudly and carrying a very small stick. We told off Franco and gave Perón a piece of our mind. Sure, Franco and Perón, they were the friends of Hitler. We blurted it right out. Franco and Perón are fascists, so there. Then what? Franco didn't quit, although we asked him to. Perón didn't even blush. He's been too busy winning an election. Our military might in Europe is less than half of what it was last summer. Morale is low, and the Army is letting it be known that we aren't ready to do any bluffing, not on big terms. Our bluff might be called. Won't take us a whole year, says the Army in the papers today, to regain a position in Europe which would justify that thing called, quote, a strong foreign policy, unquote. Dear Senator Tough Talker, may I ask you a question, sir? Is this the time, then, to persuade Russia that there's no other choice for Russia but to go to war with us? Well, I hear the word appeasement. Am I in favor of appeasing Russia just because we aren't prepared for war? Funny thing. Those who warn us most these days against appeasement were the most guilty of appeasement in Munich, in Manchukuo, and in Madrid. Well, sir, I'm not in favor of going to war, period. Nobody in his right mind can be in favor of going to war unprepared. If the tough talkers are right, if the way to keep the peace is to threaten war, for the love of logic, let's be sure about who is threatened and who is doing the threatening. Just growling, "You better look out, that gun is loaded," isn't very tough talk if you aren't holding the gun. If the gun is pointed at you, the tough talk adds up to a plea for mercy. Let's get the draw on Russia before we shoot it out. Meanwhile, let's shut up. If those who are saying war's got to come mean exactly that, they should be strong and silent. But look at them. They're noisy and weak. Mind, there's no pushover, like your flabby cynic. He encourages the battle, but he's the last to fight and the first to fall. Your flabby optimist denies the possibility of war. Your flabby cynic denies the possibility of peace. Unlike the optimist, he can't even be surprised into action. He is prepared for everything except victory. Having surrendered to war, he has already surrendered to the enemy. The cynic must be doubly smart and doubly strong because he has no faith to light his way in the world. Morally blind, he can only prevail by blinding his adversary. Choose the cynic's way, and we must keep that choice a secret. Boast of that choice, and we announce our own defeat. Oh, no. We must lay our traps in the nighttime, and our words must be sugar. Excuse me, please. Excuse the fancy pants phrasing. I've been studying Churchill too hard for the good of this program. Live 1,000 years, of course, I won't hammer out one line like his. The most casual Churchill sentence, rings like a bronze bell, and he seems to be speaking for the ages, even when he's talking through his hat. I've been living with his recent sloganeering because I want to fight it. And the high style, of course, can't be imitated, but the theater and thunder of it is contagious, so if I break out in another rash of purple, blame a mighty orator and bear with a freshman editorialist. What I want to say in plain radio American is this. Mr. Winston Churchill has been talking about war. This very public private citizen has been campaigning in America. He's made his holiday as politically significant as the massing of troops at a border. War, he says, is neither imminent nor inevitable, but he says this in a kind of postscript, and he leaves us in a kind of daze. Maybe you think he's opened our eyes and we're just blinking in the sudden glare of reality. Maybe you think he dealt a body blow to the United Nations organization. Whatever you think, I'm pretty sure that World War III doesn't seem any further away since Mr. Churchill came to our shores for a rescuer. The patchings up and the qualifications of the little lecture at the Waldorf are all weighed in, and the substance of Mr. Churchill's message still stands as a plea for immediate Anglo-American alliance. Nothing official, of course. We believe in the UNO. Nothing military, of course. We believe in the UNO. Nothing antagonistic to Russia. Not for a minute. We believe in the UNO. War? We aren't necessarily going to have to go to war. Not war. Perhaps not right away. Perhaps, but war. War. Unless the English-speaking world makes the world safe for the English-speaking world. The bright hope being that England and America can scare Russia into temporary submission. But Mr. Churchill has not given his eloquence to the obvious notion that we have no reason to fight Russia at all. And the ex-prime minister's feelings for the unhappy masses in Russia do not seem to extend to the unhappy masses of the British Empire. The great charters drafted and signed on the Atlantic and at San Francisco make suffrage and individual liberty in Russia a concern of the entire world community. But India, it seems, India is none of our business. Most assuredly, says Mr. Churchill, India is none of Russia's business. He well knows that Russia doesn't agree with him. He well knows the words of the Communist Manifesto, quote, "Workers of the world, unite, you have nothing to lose but your chains," unquote. He well knows that Russia has something better than slavery to offer the slave peoples of the British Empire. He does not know or will not offer a competitive way out for that imprisoned people. Making no offer of an alternate solution, Churchill sees no final choice for the world but world war, the destruction of the British Empire or the destruction of the Soviet Union. In his desperation, he forgets the bomb, forgets that such a contest may well mean the destruction of the living earth. And this is the way of the cynic, the ultimate obscenity. I've said that the cynic must be doubly strong, that to prevail the cynicism and the strength must be most secret. Well, then why does Churchill declare himself so candidly? Has he gone dotty? Be very sure of it. Churchill is no fool. Be just as sure that he came here not as a friendly prophet with a word of warning, but as a frightened Tory with his back to the wall. Britain can make world war only with the help of America. So Churchill says only Britain and America can make world peace. Now, that sounds almost like sense. But listen carefully. Only Britain and America can make world peace. That's not sense. It's nonsense. And Churchill knows it, so he keeps repeating piously the words UNO, UNO. But UNO means United Nations Organization. It doesn't mean the English-speaking nations united against Russia. Churchill hopes it does, and maybe Stalin thinks it does now. If so, that bomb you heard ticking may be timed for tomorrow, may be keeping its dreadful rendezvous in, shall we say, Turkey. A man called Franklin Roosevelt believed America and Russia could be friends in a friendly world. But Franklin Roosevelt sleeps in a garden in Hyde Park. Churchill paid a visit to that garden last week on his way to dinner with Dewey. The newspapers ran the picture. An arresting tableau it was, the great man at the great man's grave. The co-author of the Atlantic Charter, hatless and heedless, a great deal more dead than the friend he mourned. Miss Churchill, you hear that? Hear it, Mr. Stalin, Mr. Truman, gentlemen in high authority, listen. The bomb. The new model with a special atomic attachment, the time bomb, ticking the time away, ticking out our last few mortal moments. I'm not trying to scare you. Most of us private citizens are more scared than you are. The men of science, the men who made the bomb, they're the most frightened of all. They know about the new atomic feature, the 1946 improvement. They know what it means. The congressmen are frightened, so they want to give the final power over the atom to the army. You know, in a way, that's just as frightening as the atom bomb itself. The power has to stay with us, the people. Has to grow in us, the people. We can make a garden of this earth of ours, another Eden, or bequeath our children to the pit, to the flames, to unmarked graves in the apathetic silences of burning gas. Now the time allotted to this broadcast has run its course, so I turn off the sound effects. Wish it were as easy as that to stop the thing it stands for. I can't. You can't. But we can. Well, I've been asking those of you who've been interested to listen to write me your own thoughts, your own opinions, your own ideas, and I've been getting some wonderful letters, and to show my appreciation, I've been sending you a radio for every letter I use on this program. Mrs. M.W. Deeren of Fairfax, California, wrote me asking about World War III. This broadcast was a try at answering some of her questions. A try. My dear Mrs. Deeren, I hope the radio you're getting will bring you news with better answers than I dare hazard today. Until the better answers and the better news, I remain, as always, obediently yours.
The American Broadcasting Company and its affiliated stations has just brought you the personal, individual news commentary of Orson Welles. Be sure to listen again over many of these same stations next Sunday at the same time to Orson Welles. This is ABC, the American Broadcasting Company.
No, I think it's right on, because at the beginning of this episode, they introduce Wells in a way that I don't remember them doing other times. So they say something like, here's Orson Welles to analyze the news. What did they say? Painted with vivid word pictures from his extensive traveling. I mean, yes, he has extensively traveled. He's been to Asia and all over Europe and parts of Africa and whatever, blah, 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 whatever. He's not the biggest world traveler that you could possibly get. He's a filmmaker, a radio director, intellectual, whatever, FDR. But like, I think that's exactly right. Is they're trying to paint him as like really worldly.
Yes.
Because they're going for this intellectual angle in a way that I wouldn't even introduce Wells that way. Like, I'm writing a little thing about Wells, it would be like, and his world traveling, he could paint vivid word pictures.
I think that's what you
right.
do. I think you should create an audiobook of the things you do for Orson, and you should talk in that voice. I think it's a very good voice for you. He's a world traveler, and we have so much to introduce with Orson, and join us on our adventure with Orson this week.
There you go. Sounds like it would go with fine Corinthian leather. So
yes, exactly. All I have is vocal caricature. That's all I can do. That's the range. That's the range.
All right. Well, let's go off to now. Let's go into the atomic bomb story. I think this is good.
Wasn't recorded, was it?
Anyway, so let me start this thing off again. So this is again. This is Buck Benny speaking. I am joined with Kathy Fuller Seeley, Vincent Longo, and we are here to chat about what I think is one of the most interesting of all of the episodes of this entire series, where Orson tries to directly chat about the atomic bomb and its ramifications to the world and everything, and do it. You can tell he put a lot of thought into this one to do it in an entertaining way, using his ability to tell a story mixed with giving you the facts about what was going on, and facts that I assume he's thinking not everybody knows everything about this. Certainly at this point in time, it just recently happened. The bombs just were dropped a year before this. So anyway, let's go over to Vincent and get his thoughts on this one. I think initially the episode after this, or within a couple episodes after this, is the first time Vincent would officially join us back a number of years ago. This again is 2024. We're revisiting this one because this is one that I think Kathy and I did by ourselves, and I just thought having more people would be a good idea. So Vincent, what did you think of this one, and what stood out to you?
Yeah, I mean, I really love this episode. One, because it's a complicated tapestry of Wells's own politics, particularly in this changing time. We constantly, and Kathy does this so well, we talk about this as a weird snapshot of world politics. One in which Wells is in the middle of, particularly with Russia, because, they're allies during the war. Wells, as a, leftist advocate, aligns with, Soviet Russia and a little bit with communism in various ways. But it's getting really complicated and messy, and people are thinking war is going to strike out again. So I think that's really interesting. We get some ideas about Wells's conceptions of fascism and fear of fascism. I'll talk about that later, but I think the main thing that's really striking to me is just the drama of this episode, which is both done because of the way Wells presents it and just the huge scale of fear and drama of the bomb, right? So in another episode, which I think you'll listen to later because we did it earlier, but it's later in this series, Terry said something like, all you young people, which is I don't like, when something begins that way. But what he said really struck with me, and I think about it all the time. And Oppenheimer, the movie, helped this as well. He said, you young people don't know what it's like to think about the bomb, about the world ending from the bomb. You don't think about it in the same way. But you know what? In 1946, it's scary, and it will be scary to people in a real way for 30, 40, 50 years. And Wells's drama of this seems to be like, hey, there was a lot of people who don't realize how scary this is, how bad this is. And so what I'm going to do to you is just basically be like, hey, you have human interests. Do you want to have human interests? You can't have human interests until we do something about this bomb, because at any moment, your pinnacle game, your children, everything could be gone. And this whole episode, even though, again, he interweaves it with politics and Russia and all sorts of things, it's always with that thread, which is like, hey, we have to be thinking about how we're dealing with Russia. We have to be thinking about the UN, because there's catastrophic stakes here, which is world destruction. And I really like how he begins this episode. It's a quote that will live in my mind for free forever. He said, hey, come check out this ticking time bomb I have. It comes with streamlined wilderness where a city once stood. And he says, oh, yeah, there's children here, but they're slowly dying from radiation poisoning, basically. And to me, it's like, you can just end right there, because he's well aware, of course, we're all well aware now, but he certainly was thinking about Japan and what we had done, and other countries getting access to the bomb, like Russia in this case. And he knows everybody could easily be pointing nukes at each other, which will essentially start to happen. So how he does that, I think, is really well done. The ticking is great. How everyday life is interrupted. I really love it. It's beautiful in a creepy, disturbing way.
Agreed. Kathy, what are your thoughts on this one?
Well, I continue to be sort of gobsmacked at, as Vincent said, sort of taking us back to that moment where where thinking people are just scared out of their minds at the rapidity of which this has happened. Who's going to be in charge of this bomb? Who's going to have this bomb? At the moment, we're the only ones. But
oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But polls said that most people feared that within a year or two, everybody would have a bomb and they'd be dumping them on each other. I go back to this thing that the way we're taught the end of World War II in history textbooks is a kind of, yay, we defeated Germany, we defeated Japan, we're going to Disney World, everything is just so great. And what these broadcast commentaries by Orson Welles really bring back home how incredibly quickly the situation changed. And even in here, this one, Orson still mentions, oh yeah, when you've got England and Russia fighting, fighting with each other, that gives the Nazis an opportunity. And it's going to be one of the last times he needs to mention the Nazis, because just think, just 6 months earlier, everything about the U.S., public opinion had been defeat Nazis, defeat the Japanese fascists, defeat. And 6 months later, our best ally is England is talking about that they need to go to nuclear war against Russia because the two of them are fighting over Europe and all of the British colonial possessions. So just the rapidity of the change is simply mind-blowing. And he brings it, Orson brings it so shockingly to his audience.
The closest thing I can think to it is 9/11, and just how on 9/10 life was going on like it had for years and years and years, and then 9/11 happens, and for our country at least, everything's changed. I mean, the way you looked at the world changed. Just the way our country reacted to everything changed there for a long period of time. That it affected things, and with this 1944, for your entire life, the world had been one way, and then all of a sudden there's these horrendously powerful bombs that they can use and did use, and it just changes everything to be where, like you say, are the countries going to get this? Are we going to see that our people just start annihilating each other? I mean, we got the bomb and we're the good guys and we used it. It's like bad guys are certainly going to use it, right? I would think at the time, if you'd known how many countries would get the bomb, you wouldn't predict that they would go so unused as they have over the course of time. I mean, in reality, they haven't. You don't. It's not like every 5 years you hear, "Oh, this country bombed some other country with nuclear weapons."
Yeah.
It hasn't happened the way you think it would. But what's amazing is it's laying out there. You've got this potential that all these things could, all this destruction could happen, and it feels almost like we've gotten lucky all this time.
Mm.
And like at any point in time, that luck could run out and people can start going, well, maybe we'll start using nuclear. Certainly, we could use it against these guys because these guys are so bad and we're so good that we're in the right, and we should be able to use it against them. I mean, that's essentially what our logic was against the Japanese, right?
Yeah.
And certainly in the way countries and even political parties think now, it's sort of like the other one is so evil and so bad that you should be able to do whatever you want to them. But we're all human beings. So it's like, and luckily we haven't done that and hopefully won't do that. But it's just amazing.
You're right. But the threat is always there, and it's still there in the news today, with the threat that some rogue person is, some rogue country leader we don't like is going to start doing this. But as you say, we've had plenty of war and bloodshed, but not these bombs. So so.
And now with the Supreme Court decision that a future president of the United States could use that in the performance of his duties and not be held accountable for it, not to have to ever face any kind of accountability for doing that, it seems like. So that's a whole nother scary piece that's out there. I don't know. It's
well, I mean, part of that is why Wells keeps emphasizing, which is, a good idea, but I understand it's not as practical. He keeps saying like, oh, the bomb, we need to control the bomb. And when he says we mean the people. He keeps saying that, like, give the people the bomb, give the people the bomb. Don't give the person the bomb, give the people the bomb. Yeah. He seems to be emphasizing like, okay, yeah, we can't just have individuals in charge of these things because of that exact reason. Like maybe they can't be held accountable, or who's to say that they should be the ones that decide this. But that's how it's set up. Right. I mean, I understand that they would argue quickly, like, oh, well, if somebody shoots a bomb at us, we can't just go to a vote and everybody votes whether we're going to shoot the bomb off. Right. That's what they would say. But it's a lot of responsibility to have control over that in a way that, like you said, Daryl, we've been so fortunate to think, oh, no one's touched the bomb. We're good. We don't have to worry about that. But like somebody could touch the bomb. And if one person touches the bomb, other people will touch the bomb.
Yeah. Dr. Strangelove. That's what we got going on. But I've mentioned this before. There's a fabulous book called By the Bomb's Early Light that talks about what was going on in 1946 was indeed this idea of who should it be Congress has control of the bomb, the executive, the president, solely the military? How about the scientists? Should no country have the bomb, but should it be an international kind of United Nations of scientists was one proposal. And the fact that it ended up being nations and their military with this other kind of civilian oversight is what it ended up. But back in the day, it was very much when the bomb was brand new. Who is going to be in charge of the thing? Who's going to control it?
Well, that's what makes this kind of timely right now, too, again, in that Oppenheimer has recently come out last summer. And I think that movie is an interesting film to get an understanding of kind of what was going on at the time and how they were proceeding and so forth. I'm such a, I don't know, fan's the right word. I'm so into history and media and how it all relates to each other. I just find it infinitely interesting how, because they happen to release on the same day, the same weekend or whatever, how the film Oppenheimer and Barbie got intermixed, became Barbenheimer, and where that kind of had this life of its own, that these two things linked together that didn't go together at all. And that movie has its own sort of deep thoughts within that film that I think are interesting, but certainly not one that I would tie into Oppenheimer in any way.
And atomic bomb.
Yeah, exactly. but it was history is such an interesting thing, the way we experience it in our daily lives, and the way we try and put our minds around it. Sometimes we link to things that don't link together very well just because they're from the same time frame. Anyway, interesting times we live in. So, and this one, like I say, hugely interesting to listen to.
Yep.
By the time they listen to this, they've already heard the show. The only caveat I'll throw on there is if you at all fast forwarded to us because it didn't sound so great at the beginning of quality of the show, within about a minute and a half, it clears up and the rest of the episode sounds just fine, like all the episodes do. It's just unfortunate first minute and a half or so of this episode didn't survive the best. I'm just glad we have it at all. So
Yeah.
I would just say for listeners, we've been talking about previous episodes, what's going on in early 1946,
right.
and Orson seeming kind of rushed because he's got so much he wants to spill out here about the middle of the broadcast. I just wrote word salad in my notes because he's talking and talking.
Yeah.
And the fact that supposedly the letter writer, he wanted to mention someone who's just written him, Mrs. Deeren, had just written a letter to him about World War III, and that's all he manages to get out at the very end of the broadcast. So I really appreciate his passion. This is something that sort of can't wait for a measured, rational discussion. Decisions have to be made now. So many moving parts, and people need to be aware of it and not just sort of accept what they're being told. But
you're right. There is a
make this just one 15-minute show about nuclear. He carries the thread over. Vincent was mentioning how after a while it gets to be, is he using the ticking yet again because he used it so many times? But it is important enough subject that he knew this is something that needed to go on through multiple shows. But Vincent, you were going to say.
Yeah, I was just saying, like, Kathy, I really like that when you wrote down word salad, because there is a point, there is a rhetoric behind when he gets like really fast. And, he's always thinking about presentation. And he does that in two moments here that I think are really interesting. One is at the beginning where he's like, oh, you're at church, you're at golf, you're playing with your kids, you're doing whatever. The bomb is here. The bomb could come for you. You're playing Pinnacle. You know what? You can't really think about Pinnacle because the bomb could get you at any moment. Like, that's one of these moments where he's like, you can't just calm down. The other time he does it, though, is with when he talks about the United Nations and their feud. Because he basically, like, one thing that he does really weirdly, and I'm not sure, it's difficult to understand, but worth it if you do, is when, a lot of politics are people just completely not listening, arguing, going back and forth in a meaningless sort of circle of nothingness. And Wells, he like presents that orally in a lot of his broadcasts. This one in particular, he's talking about, and I'll try to explain some of the words salad here because it's a little confusing. Essentially, he's talking about the United Nations and this idea when the United Nations was formed that some people, like he's saying, Churchill, thought, well, the United Nations is going to just be the Western Anglophone countries, US and Britain, just calling the shots and doing whatever they want and telling everybody what to do. And Wells is saying essentially that it cannot be that way. And he's particularly worried about Russia. He's worried about Russia because I assume he thinks that they're going to get the bomb soon. And he's saying, like, if we don't listen to Russia in any way, they're going to want to go to war. And in fact, we're already talking about war. But then he's talking about, again, because Russia was, Soviet Union was an ally in the war. And again, Wells as this very leftist, friends with actual communists and things like that. He likes pro-worker. He likes anti-slavery. He doesn't like racism. These are things that politically we see coming out of the Soviet Union and Marxism and things like that. And so I think Wells feels some alignment, at least. Certainly he's not like a, pro Russia, but you get these really confusing statements. And so he goes out of his way to show some of the hypocrisy. So he says, for example, he's like, hey, when the US and Britain says Russia, get out of Iran, which, they're worried about, they're going in and getting oil in particular. He's like, well, okay, well then US, get out of here, get out, Britain, get out of India. Like, there's this imperialist hypocrisy that Wells is sort of saying, like, this is a dead end argumentatively, because they're just going to point fingers at each other, like this Spider-Man thing, like, oh, you're, and then he says with the UK or Britain in particular, he's like, you know what? I think that Britain is afraid that the Soviet Union is actually going to have something that India wants, which is freedom. They don't want to be, a colony anymore. And you know what Russia preaches? They preach no slaves, no chains, no anything, which of course is something that Wells is really a fan of. So he does go out of his way to show that, there are some things that we could learn from the Soviet Union. Of course, he also knows that they might just point a big old rocket at our heads too. But I think for some people who think of Russia, again, soon to be, again, the enemy of the state, which it's quickly coming up, Wells was not that way at this time, even though he understands it's not all rosy with that relationship.
Agreed.
That's such a great point. Thank you, Vincent. And that the backlash then in the U.S., that will lead to, Orson basically having to leave the country too.
Exactly.
To go so quickly from Russia being our ally of necessity in defeating the Nazis to turning that they want to both their motive for not just sort of sitting tight, but moving to be a world player, really upsets the British apple cart, who want everything they used to have before the war back and no changes. And it's a changing world. And what do we do with our these folks who had been our allies? And I really do like that, at least in this episode, that Orson is willing to trash Churchill and say Churchill's being a warmonger. Churchill's been kicked out of his own government, but he's traveling across the U.S. preaching World War III, and we've got to be careful. So
yeah, I can't remember if it's this episode or the next. Oh, no, it is this one that he talks about Churchill a lot, right? So I wanted to mention this a couple things. Like you said, Kathy, he's a big fan of Churchill, and he says that in this episode as well, which is like, I've been studying Churchill. He says something like, I've been studying Churchill far more. That's good for this podcast, this commentary. And that's true. I don't know exactly when Wells did this, but he was very interested in strong leaders, of which Churchill, is a famous one. He's really interested in great orators, which we all think of Churchill as one. But Wells was, at some point in his life, I don't know when the script is dated, I'll have to look at it again. He was writing a film script. What, sorry?
March 17th, 1940.
No, sorry. I meant when there's a script that exists in the U of M archive that's about, it's like Great Leaders or something like that. It's a film that he had, of which a third of it was completely dedicated to Churchill. And so I'd like to think, and I don't know if this is true, that he was doing this research for this script that he was doing. And so he probably was actually researching a lot on Churchill. But you're right. He absolutely takes him to task for the main thing we were just talking about, which is Churchill wants all these, the Britain to have all these things that they had before. They particularly don't want to appease Russia. And he's like, why is the first thing that we're all going to, oh, you want to, you want to do this? Well, we'll just go to war with you. And he's like, do you actually want war? Do we want war? I don't want war. Why are you saying that? He's like, if you're really that strong, just be strong and silent and stop mentioning war. Yeah, I agree. He takes him to task in a way that was surprising for how he usually talks about Churchill. Although he does then say, oh, Churchill is such a better speaker than me. And if I'm trying to sound more flowery than usual, which is not true, he sounds equally flowery as Wells always does. He's like, it's because Churchill is such a great orator. I'm like, okay. Yep. Yeah, it's the great ambivalence that Wells has with power in all of his work, in his films and his radio. He himself thinks of himself as a very powerful man. He allies himself with powerful people, but he also likes to think of himself as a man of the people, for workers' rights, for race equality, all these things. And sometimes those things bat heads in a way that, comes off as contradictory or at least conflicts in his own work and political commentary.
Right. Excellent. Wow, what a good discussion. Anything else with this one? Are we good?
Uh,
I think we'll let it go. I think we bashed this one up enough, but I think we cover a lot of ground just like he does, so that's good. And what an enjoyable episode! What creativity on the part of Orson to present this in this way. So I hope you enjoyed Orson's presentation as well. And for goodness sake, listen to us, but listen to Orson for sure. That's why we're here. So, all right. All right, hello again. This is Buck Benny speaking. I am joined with Kathy Fuller-Seeley today. We are here to bring you a really interesting episode of Orson Welles. I love it in that I didn't listen to this one ahead of time beforehand, like I usually do, and I thought it was interesting. I mean, I listened to it before. I've listened to it. Let me put it that way. But I talked last week, I think, or the week before, about how he has like these packed shows that have all kinds of subject matter, and then maybe the next week he'll have one that's just focusing on like one issue. Well, we recently have had just really packed shows with tons of information, and so I was feeling in my heart, I was going, okay, it's about time for a single issue show, and boom, here we are. This issue focuses probably more than any other show, and it's almost done like a radio show in itself, like a self-contained, like almost a script he wrote or whatever, because you have you'll hear right at the beginning, there's a ticking that goes through the whole thing, like a ticking time bomb it's supposed to be, of course. And this whole episode focuses on the atomic bomb and what might happen with that. He goes into the politics of it. He covers a lot of ground within that, but it's all within the bomb and that sort of thing. And at the very end, he says why he did it. He says essentially there's a woman who wrote a letter that's asking him about World War III, and this is sort of his answer to that. And a brilliant show of all the shows we've shown. Probably you get the most passion coming from him on this subject. He is truly worried about that our world might not continue. And certainly one of these shows that resonates today, because you feel like you're in that same boat. We've said that many times with his shows, but this one probably more than most. And I don't think we feel like that ticking time bomb is as much atomic or nuclear devastation as it is, say, climate change and destroying Earth that way. But it's still, I was telling Kathy before we got on the air here that I think Orson would have been completely surprised if you said how many countries had nuclear capability now, and asked him in these 75 years since, if you go forward 75 years, do you think someone will have used a bomb? And I think in knowing how many countries would have it in the future, I think he would have said, oh, unfortunately, definitely. I can't imagine that they wouldn't. And yet we're the only country that's really used a bomb. Everybody else has them, but as Kathy was telling me, they come close. But anyway, what are your kind of thoughts on this amazing episode, Kathy?
I agree with you absolutely, Daryl. This one took me back almost physically to that moment. This is March 17th, 1946. The war in Europe has been over for 11 months. But we see the happy images about the end of World War II with sailors kissing nurses and parades and happy. And now we're going to go build suburbs and have the prosperous 50s. That is the easy way. We've won World War II and now we're going to Disneyland kind of stories about the end of the war. And this episode so viscerally takes us back to the absolute terror that was actually going on at the time. Yes, we've won the war, but oh my God, this suddenly we're into this whole new thing, and it's not in our control. The way he pitches that his anger at Winston Churchill and rattling sabers against Russia, and he's trying to say, but the nice Russian people. So that's but then there's what is going on is that Stalin and Churchill are vying for for world power too. He is so, again, it amazed me that he was so negative about the British. given our longtime relationship. But when he says, hey, Churchill, what about the millions of enslaved peoples you've got in your colonial country? Why are you asking us to back you as
Right.
opposed to, the Russians? He's sort of really laying it out as in sort of trying to see both sides of the issue. And it is not something that American politicians are going to let him do for much longer. He raises these incredible fears, very rightly so, about the time bomb is ticking. We could all die. This is this huge bomb, and we don't even really know yet, but he hints then about the things about the children still dying from radiation.
Yeah,
And
that was really
wants
powerful to me when he said about I've never heard anybody really point that out at the time, and he's like, children are still dying from this bomb that we did a long time ago.
Right.
It's been a while, and they're still getting sick and dying from this.
Well, that's because the military didn't want us to know. Nobody really knew at the time the bomb was dropped what its long-term effects would be. And the military very much the happy atom, the peaceful atom. But it was John Hershey, a journalist, going over, and he wrote a multi-part magazine piece called Hiroshima, which went back about this time and said, do you know how the people are suffering, skin still falling off, devastation, that's, you don't ever want to use one of these things again. They said, and Orson has captured all of that so much, and he's still sort of rooting for President Roosevelt. Sort of FDR is over his shoulder saying, let's honor him by doing the right thing, but he's terrified, and he's laying it all out to try and make Americans think about it.
It definitely forces people to think. You would think at the time, listen to this, and even today, it makes you think a little bit. On a side lighter note for this thing, first off, I want to tell you that when you hear the beginning of this episode, you're going to go, oh my goodness, the sound quality is not what we're used to at all, because it's not very good at the beginning. But within 2 minutes or something, it gets quite a bit better. It's still not as good as the sound quality we're used to on this show. I don't know where this source comes from. It sounds like it's different than our usual source, because it certainly isn't of the caliber of our usual source. But I'm so glad we have it instead of just losing it because of sound quality. And like I say, it's very listenable. Don't worry about that. It'll clear up and it'll be just fine. The other piece I want to point out is I sort of, when I was listening to this and looking at the time when it came out and thinking to myself, boy, the sponsor had to really sit back and bite their tongue on this one and just going to go, he's in charge. It's his commentary. We're just going to go with it. Because it would be so tempting to go, so Orson, this is coming out on St. Patrick's Day. Why don't you talk about leprechauns and do a little story? We'd love to hear your voice narrating a leprechaun story. I think our audience would love that. And you can talk about nuclear disaster some other week. But why? But Orson is like, I don't care if it's St. Patrick's Day. I'm going for it. And he just goes for it in a way that in the whole series so far. I mean, the audience is going, boy, every few weeks they say this over and over again, how this episode is like the ultimate episode or whatever. But for me, he's never gone as passionate as he has in this episode. He really lays it on the line. I think he was just terrified that we're going to end the planet. And he's like, we have got to get a handle on this. We've got to. I love the fact that he still resonates today of, I can't do anything about this. You can't do anything about this. We can solve this. We can do this if we get together and the people speak up. The people have the power. And that is still true, of course, today and forevermore, that if we all get together and decide we're going to do something, we can get it done. And I think that is a very powerful message for the time, for today, for any day. I mean, I think it's great. I cannot tell you how much I enjoy this episode and how much I am terrified by this episode, but also just the way he presents it. Only Orson could pull something like this off. He could write and beautifully, and he does write beautifully here. He could narrate it beautifully, and he does. And in a terrifying way, and the ticking was a great added piece that at times he really plays on the ticking and really uses that to emphasize his points, and just a great show. Kathy, you have anything else to add about this episode?
Oh, no, thanks. I keep speaking about things that I've just got to play for my students. This is one I've just got to play for students to sort of understand that how dire the situation was. As I said, at a time in which some basic history books just want to talk about, as they said, the U.S. feeling like it's just time to celebrate, and there were so many things to worry about. Right. So,
well, and I will use this moment to just kind of mourn what folks have missed out on for 75 years. We are probably going to be presenting this to more people that have heard it since 1946 when it was originally aired. This was one of the episodes, as far as I can tell, that was lost to time for the last 75 years and just discovered, along with a lot of these episodes we're in the part of the series where I don't think any of these in the upcoming number of weeks or months have been played anywhere for decades and decades, well, for 7 decades or more. And the fact that we get a chance to enjoy these, we get a chance to experience these, and be impacted by Orson in this way, I think is just a wonderful thing. I think Orson would be so happy that we're presenting this to people to get out there to the largest audience we can. In fact, this particular episode, I think it's worthy of airing on all of my podcasts. So I think I'm going to air it on all 3 of my podcast networks, just because it is such an amazing piece of history, and one that's been lost for many, many, many decades, as I say. And I'm just so happy that Kathy can join me. When we were originally just doing Jack Benny together, and then when I started listening to these episodes and thinking about them and knowing Kathy's history background, I just thought I have to at least let her see if she wants to do these with me.
And they're marvelous, because I certainly hadn't known about them before, and it's sort of revelatory. It's like finding, this amazing lost "You Are There" document.
Yeah, this is one of the great finds in old time radio history, I think, because if we'd done this 3 years ago, you and I would have sat down and we would have talked about 10 of these episodes is all we would be able to present. Certainly this one wouldn't have been there. It would have been some of the ones we already covered and things, and it would have been great. But now we can talk about 60 ish of these episodes that exist, and week after week we can meet and chat about them, and he brings on so many different subjects, and it gets you to understand what people were going through at that time. And so often, like this one, bridges over 75 years into our time, and we're still dealing with that issue and still needing to do it. I mean, the big news the last couple weeks or whatever was that the arms treaty between the United States and Russia had just gotten re-upped and things, and they want to expand it, which I think is fabulous that they try and expand it. The big thing is making sure that each side honors what they say they're going to do, because that so often doesn't happen. But certainly it's a move in the right direction, and I think Orson would applaud any treaties we can do that are nuclear treaties to stop the nuclear proliferation and everything. I think that's something that this show would definitely push and everything, and so forth. But without further ado, enjoy Orson in this amazing, amazing piece. And Kathy, so glad you could join me on this.
Thank you so much, dear.
You're welcome. And we'll see all of you guys next week and every week for Orson Welles. If you're listening to this on one of my other podcasts, it's usually on my Judy Garland and Friends, because we believe that Orson might have been a friend of Judy Garland. We're not sure, but it's
a pretty good bet.
It's my catch-all for famous people, and Orson definitely qualifies as a famous person like Judy was, so in his own way. So enjoy.